Ryan Day, Ohio State head coach at Big Ten Media Days. A lot going on here. You've been doing this several times now. When you get half a decade in to being a head coach, do you look back and think it went by in a blur? Or, I mean, is this stuff that you vividly remember every step of the way?
Some points you think it's a blur. Other times you look back on pictures and you look at your face and you're like, okay, looks like I just served 2 terms in the White House. There's just some things that seem like it just happened yesterday. And then other times I wake up and my wife and I are talking about this is year 7 in Columbus for us. So at points it seems like, it's gone fast, but other points, it seems like, every year is a grind because it is. There's just a lot that comes with it, but we wouldn't have it any other way.
So people who aren't familiar with the sport, they just see the salaries. They look and say, man, those guys make a ton of money to coach a game. And then I look at you and I see you're 45-6, and yet all I hear is criticism from the same folks, ironically, that are kind of uninformed about it. I know that comes with the territory, but it doesn't make you immune from feeling human emotion. So what is that like when you're having success numerically, but the key dominoes don't fall a couple of years in a row and that's what you're left with?
A lot of conversations with my kids and my wife because they read stuff too. You have to win them all. That's how it goes. And, I feel like last year, we finish, the kick or, finish that game off. We're probably sitting here having a different conversation. But that's part of this game. And, what you can do is every year learn and grow. But when you're at a place like Ohio State, the expectations are at the highest level. You're expected to win the rivalry game and win every game after that. And that's just the way it goes. And so you wouldn't want it any other way. But that being said, when you look at the culture and you look at the team that we have coming back, when you look at the way recruiting's going, when you look at our staff, all those types of things, there's just so many things that are encouraging and exciting about this team in particular that has made it a great offseason and looking forward to this year.
It's been amazing to see it's always amazing to see what decides a football game. A bounce here, a turnover there. Every one of your guys I've talked to have emphasized that you guys have just focused on finishing second half. That's something a lot of people say. So when you specifically look and say, we got to close out second halves, what is it about your program that you change? What specific practices do you implement?
We closed out the second half of the Notre Dame game and the Penn State game. Actually came back in the Penn State game to win, but didn't in the last 2 games. And man, it just drives you crazy when you think back on that. So we spent a lot of time, this offseason trying to figure out that very question. And it's been all about competition. It's been about me competing against you in almost everything that we did in the offseason. So, if we're competing against something, you do 10, I'm going to do 11. Once I do 11, you're probably going to do 12. So how do you get that one extra rep, that one extra, win? And that's what it's going to come down to, winning your one-on-one battles. But doing it, for 4 quarters, and especially, in those big games down the stretch.
How do you feel about this team? A couple of weeks away from camp.
Yeah, excited. You could probably feel it in my voice and just the way it is. You sleep knowing that you have some experience. Certainly on defense, probably the best we've been since 2019. Year 2 with Coach Knowles. Some experience at linebacker up front. Probably the most depth we've had at corner in a long time. So all that being said, excited to see how this team is. On offense, probably the most skill we've had on offense in a long time. We've got to fill some holes in the O-line and figure out who our quarterback's going to be. Unbelievable depth at running back. So, all the pieces are in place, but that's not really what fires me up the most. To me, this is the most experienced team we've had. They've been through it. We've had some really good talent the last couple of years, but they've been young. These guys have been playing, JTT, Jack, Tyleek, Tommy. These guys all played from a young age. Steele had to, make that move from a running back over to a linebacker, and he had to step up. Emeka played as a freshman. Marvin, that Rose Bowl those guys had. You think about these guys, Donovan played as a youngster. So even though maybe some of them are 5th, 6th, Xavier Johnson's been around for a long time. Some of those guys have been here for a while. Some of them, now they're going into year 3, but they played a bunch when they were young. And some of the best ones we had, really, they take that last step at their 3rd year. Now, the great ones we lose after 3 years, which is not fun. But I think that's probably overall the leadership, the edge, and the experience.
I was talking to you earlier about what it's like when you guys have the kind of offense you normally do. Because a lot of times you run up the score. A lot of times it's where I could tune out at halftime if I wanted to. but you have to maintain intensity. Not for that week, but for the coming weeks, because you're going to have games where eventually those mistakes do stand out. Now that's easy to say. How hard is that to drill into a bunch of different human beings' minds?
Yeah, the thing we talk about all the time is after the game, the issues are always there. The job of the coaches and the leaders is to identify those issues and get them fixed before they show up in a matchup game. And like you're saying, you could be up a couple scores, 3-4 scores, and if you see something on the field that isn't right, like it has to get addressed there, or it's going to show up down the road. It might be in practice, you don't know. And so we set the standard, and then we have to make sure that we're playing at that standard at the end of the season.
I hear you interviewed a lot. It seems to me like about 60 to 70% of the questions are about off-the-field stuff nowadays. I'm sure even in the half decade or so that you've been a head coach, you've seen your plate change in terms of what's on it and what you deal with day to day. Walk someone who's an outsider through what the evolution of the role of head coach has been like in college football.
Yeah, well, I think that now more than ever, you have to have an impact on more than just the football field. I think it's kind of always been like that in college football, but now more than ever. These guys nowadays, with the recruiting process, NIL is a part of this. So talking to folks within, your program about what those options are for our players and making sure that they have what's fair. The great thing for us in Columbus is we have such great infrastructure right there in the city. We have such a huge fan base, so there's great opportunity for us that way. But that's a big part of, some of the conversations we have and introducing this and introducing it to our fan base to make sure that it's normalized. They understand how that part of it is important.
When you guys break for camp, I don't even think you were done talking.
Well, I just think about, like, the other one is the transfer portal.
Yep.
That's just a huge change that's happened. So when you combine that with NIL, the transfer portal, to me, you're not recruiting your players. Like some people say, you have to recruit your own team. I don't know what that really means. Like you have to communicate with your team. You have to make sure that what you're saying in the recruiting process is followed through once they're in your program. And I think you look at our team, we don't have a lot of guys leave our program, and that's because we're pretty clear about what we're doing on the front end. We treat them with respect and we communicate while they're there, but that takes time. And I think that, to your point, that's something that you have to do as the head coach.
I'm going to get you out of here on this. Go anywhere you want to with it. When you guys break for fall camp coming up, a couple of weeks, you're focused on a million things. But from my perspective on the outside, what are the one or two things that ultimately the outcome of this season will boil down to? Aside from quarterback, because I know quarterback is going to be the focus of everyone. So besides that.
Well, I think when you look at camp, you have to get the guys ready that need to play. So Tommy Eichenberg doesn't need the same amount of snaps as C.J. Hicks. Marvin Harrison doesn't need the same amount of snaps as Carnell Tate. Whoever our left tackle is going to be doesn't need the same amount of snaps as Donovan Jackson. So finding that right mix during the preseason camp is going to be important. But the other part is, the quarterback. Where are we at? When you're playing in matchup games, it typically comes out of the quarterback. The best quarterbacks in the country are going to play. You look at, the Heisman Trophy last year. You had C.J., you had Bryce, you had Max, you had Stetson Bennett. I mean, all these guys were part of that conversation. Look at the best teams are down the stretch. So the quarterback has to play at a high level. The good news for us is we have a great supporting cast. So especially early on in the process, I say it all the time, you got to make the routine plays routinely. You got to make great decisions. And then as the season goes, they can kind of build and grow and build their identity as a player. And so that'll be a part of the growing process, just like we did with CJ his freshman year. That was only a couple years ago. We played Minnesota on the road first game, and everyone was holding their breath. But then he grew as the season went on, and then obviously became a really good quarterback now. Played his best game probably in that last game against Georgia. And then he goes on to the NFL draft and we lose him, So that's a bittersweet part of building up quarterbacks. These guys have both now, been in the program for 2 and 3 years, and so they got a lot of good football ahead of them.
Ryan Day, we appreciate it.
You got it, brother. All right.